you check the children? Show a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Jacky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bevenidos, Fright fans, and welcome to the Horror Show. I'm Jaime and Fuego, and very stoked to be returning for the 2023 coverage that we had the awesome opportunity to do of the International Horror and Sci-Fi Film Festival, working in partnership with the Phoenix Film Festival. So, big shout out, obviously, to Monty Yazzie, to Jason Carney of the IHSFF and PFF, respectively, and then to Patrick at Allied for helping us out with the press credentials. We always greatly appreciate this, and it's always so much fun. And so we have to break up our coverage into 3 separate installments. So there's the stuff that I saw solo, and then that is going to be 2 different videos, and this is the first of those, obviously. And then the final one is going to be the features that Cecil and myself had the opportunity to see together, which was cool. Unfortunately, with Dylan's New Nightmare taking a lot of very warranted and necessary precedence, and with just me going back to school, different schedules, we didn't get to see as much together as we wanted, and so on and so forth. But so let's start it out here with a film that I greatly enjoyed. It was called Mind, Body, Spirit, and this was actually directed by 2 different people. So we had Alex Hennis and we had Matthew Miranda, and this is about a girl who is kind of struggling with some depression, had an episode of sorts that you don't really get a lot of information about, but she has made the decision that she's going to relocate, leave her town. I think she was back east, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, because it's been a few weeks since we actually saw these films. But she moves to California, and she is going to now reside in her recently deceased grandmother's home. Now, the interesting thing about her grandma, she had all kinds of, odd European ties as far as, theologies and philosophies, and, dare I say, things of the occult, so to speak. And after our girl moves in, she starts to just get these little indications that there's maybe a residual spiritual presence that is remaining in the house. And another thing I have to mention about this is that it is kind of I guess I would describe it as found footage in the fact that she's kind of a YouTuber, and she's trying to do, the title hints at it. So Mind, Body, Spirit, obviously. She's trying to be like a self-help person of sorts, and she is trying to just forge forward in this YouTubing thing. And you're watching this on YouTube, so there are elements of humor in this that I really appreciate, because there are fake ads that come on at a couple different parts within the film. They're funny, and our lead, her name is Sarah J. Bartholomew. She's great. She has the camera for pretty much the entirety of the movie. There's 2 other characters, her mother and then a friend, that show up. They're really the only of note to make mention of, but it's Sarah's show, man, and she holds it down. I was very just engaged, and she has an essence of charm to herself, but yet also vulnerability because of some of those things that are revealed as we get, later on into the film. But yeah, kind of a strained relationship with her mother, and her mother hints to the fact that she had a strained relationship with Sarah's character's grandmother, the one who had those kind of occult dealings, but she doesn't really want to reveal what Grandma was into, and so she keeps it very vague, and that's presumably one of the reasons why she didn't even want her moving there in the first place. And so the film, it gains momentum as things go on, as you would assume with this sort of setup it would. And I was a big fan of this. I'm not sure if it has secured distribution already, but yeah, it was one of my personal favorites of the Phoenix Film Festival in partnership with IHSFF, International Horror Sci-Fi Film Festival. So these are going to be kind of rapid fire reviews because of the fact that there is so much to cover. But yeah, Mind, Body, Spirit, it's a little lo-fi, obviously, because of the fact that it being found footage, and it's all pretty much one location. The friend who comes to collaborate on a few videos with her is adequately annoying. So, but yeah, I mean, a convincing performance in the way that character was written. Mom is a little more on the paper-thin side, but she only has, a few different bits here and there to take part in. Yeah, you don't really get much of a score in films like this, because it is, somebody just talking to a camera for the most part. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I liked to what it built to. If I'm going to say any detriments, I mean, there are a bit of an aspect of predictability here, but I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would really be kind of grasping at straws and, the splitting hairs and all that different stuff if I was going to say that those small little gripes or just constructive bits of criticism, kind of deterred from it. And it turns into like an essence of, I'm not going to say it goes as far as body horror per se, but it gets there, with some of the stuff that starts to happen as it reveals what this series of videos that it's in collaboration of sorts, I guess, or inspired by some books that she finds in this little in this part of the home. So I like the way it develops. I was engaged. Solid performances. Mind, body, spirits. Definitely recommend it. So now we jump to my second recommendation, and just to give a little bit more insight, these are going to be 2 recommendations and then 2 that I wasn't quite so fond of. So my second recommendation here is going to be a film entitled Megalomaniac. And Megalomaniac is one of the grimmer, and I have to just cycle to the proper information here, this is one of the grimmer and darker films that I have seen in recent memory. It was probably, like, I felt dirty after this movie, legitimately. So this is directed by Karim Oilhaj. I'm just butchering this name, unfortunately. But this is an international film. I forget what country in Europe it is, in fact, from. But so there is a serial killer that is active in, if I recall correctly, I'm trying to remember if it's the 90s or the early 2000s. But needless to say, going around butchering women and just leaving their remains in like these bags, if I recall correctly, like on the sides of the highway. And so this was going on for quite a while, and then all of a sudden, the person was stopped, and they had various leads and multiple victims, but killer was never caught. And you see this guy right at the very beginning, and you find out why he stopped killing, because of the fact that a woman he had taken into captivity. Now, they don't really clarify if it was him that got this woman pregnant that he was holding captive, or maybe he just happened to, kidnap and was torturing a woman who he found out later on was pregnant. Whatever. Inconsequential. So there's a birthing scene at the very beginning of this, and there is a boy who's already there, witnesses what goes down, and fast forward to present day, and present day, boy is grown up, and little sister, who was birthed at the beginning of the film, is grown up. But you also find out that dad killer is dead, because there's these very trippy, like, sequences of, like, his ghost or some form of, his residual spiritual presence, a term I used earlier already, obviously, showing up. And the son, who you saw, at the very beginning of the film, watching the birth of this sister, so to speak, he's taken up, if it's his real father or just was being raised by this guy, who the hell knows, but they call him father at various points. But brother and sister are all grown up, and brother is, he's taken up the killing games of what his dad was doing. He's taken up the mantle. And yet sister, to kind of just save face and make sure that they are, like, flying under the radar, so to speak, she works at this factory, and she's like she's a janitor, she's just a cleaning lady of sorts, and she is heavily oppressed. She is bullied, and you kind of get the feeling when we're introduced to these 2 specific guys that are the main perpetrators of it, you get the vibe that this has been happening for a while. And there's another guy who is witness to what's going on, and yet he kind of tries to stand up to them a little bit, but he's kind of a little bitch. And so for that reason, he tries to stand up to these 2 guys at one point, and then he just kind of backs off. And as the bullying turns into actual sexual assault, and so these guys are raping her, man. And this is where this sort of subject is very, I don't find a lot of enjoyment in, rape revenge sort of tales and stuff like that. And that is, in fact, what this becomes. And yet the B story is still the fact that the brother is also at the same time going out and killing women. And so this is a humorless, grim, just messed up movie, man. And great score, I gotta say. It does veer from, like, techno-y stuff to, like, almost like, Euro metal at times too, which, I'm obviously into. But this movie just, as I said, it left me feeling dirty and just grimy and gross, especially with a lot of the stuff that transpires on screen. I'm not going to say it's like glorifying the sort of behavior or anything, but it's really her wrestling with the fact of, okay, these disgusting men are doing horrible things to me, so do I want to extract revenge? Do I want to presumably follow in the father's footsteps? But it's a little bit different between her and Brother because of the fact that, Brother is doing it to helpless victims, and yet she would be doing it to the very deserved. However, without spoiling things, there's something that happens midway through with her begging Brother for a pet. And the begging of a brother for a pet is where you sympathize with this character because of the atrocities that are being handed down to her, but she kind of becomes irredeemable, but yet it's because of what's been done to her. So it's very much like, what the abuse that she's almost like passing it along. It's like they say all the time that all too often, not just sexual abusers, but physical abusers, it's because somebody else has abused them previously. And so it just it's passed along kind of in that just veracity. And so that's kind of what goes down. But I dare say, I mean, the acting is very solid from both brother and sister. Sister is our main character. I guess it's good enough from, the abusers at her work. I don't know, one is so quiet, you don't really get much from him. He's just kind of like the tag-along to the shithead who's like really instrumental and leading the proceedings of all of this. However, I will say the ending is incredibly predictable. You see it a mile away, but then again, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's funny at the naivety of certain characters in this, without spoiling things once again. But so yeah, that's my brief thoughts on Megalomaniac. Once again, this is one that I don't know. Just like with the previous film I mentioned, Mind, Body, Spirit, I don't know if this has secured a distribution like a VOD release date, or if it would be heading to like Shudder or Screenbox, one of the streamers or something like that. But Megalomaniac, it's most definitely worth seeking out, but definitely brace yourself because it's brutal, man. It most definitely is. And there is a psychedelic freakout sequence. There is a incestuous dream sequence, like all these mashing bodies. Like, this was very, very well made, and yet very disturbing. And I got thick skin, man. So props to Megalomaniac for getting a recommendation out of me. All right, so those are my two recommends for this video. Okay. And unfortunately now I have to go into my two non-recommends. And my two non-recommends are going to start first and foremost with a film that's not like, okay, this is not the full-on, like, it's bad or anything like that, because there's a lot of redeeming qualities to it, but I just wasn't like the biggest fan of it. And also because of the fact that it's not really much of a horror movie. It's been covered, as Robert and Cecil informed me, by a lot of the horror sites, but I would imagine it's by people who haven't seen it. And I was actually glad when I sat down, though, that I did not, know where the film was going, because all I knew was that the strange case of Jacky Caillou? I'm trying to remember because it's a French movie, and I don't want to butcher the pronunciation of our protagonist's name. But, so all that I knew was that this is a film about a kid who is living in this small, more rural area of France. Beautiful cinematography in this film, by the way. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Especially when him and his grandmother, who he lives with, are walking up, this, mountain road sort of area. Just the scenery is gorgeous in this area of France, man. It's breathtaking. And so his grandmother is a local mystic / healer of sorts. And helps a lot of people in the community, but yet after she, takes the negative energy of these afflictions, she's drained, and she has to go pass it along to she's almost at one with nature, and yet she does have some Christianity sort of sense to some of the things that she's reciting the Lord's Prayer and stuff. So I don't know, her philosophy, religion, whatever the heck you want to say, it does seem to me like a hodgepodge of a few different things. And so and I was raised Reformed Baptist, So, but in any event, Jacky's parents tragically died in a car accident, and so his grandmother raised him, and the film really starts to go when she randomly passes herself. And shortly before she died, as we see early on in the film, Jacky, despite being a musician, and he's working on some interesting, just experimental sort of tunes is the best way I would describe it, he has shown some inclinations to want to follow in his grandmother's footsteps and, be trained to have this sort of healing capacity and whatnot. And there's a girl right before grandmother dies as well that plays a big part in the plot that comes and has like this spreading sort of, it looks almost like spory hair kind of something on her back, and you don't necessarily know what the heck it is. And it's getting bigger, and the grandmother tries to help her, and tells Jacky, she's not receptive, she's not being completely honest with me about how this came about and why it's even there on her body in the first place. Okay, you can tell I'm being relatively vague, and I'm gonna leave it as vague because apparently, from what I understand, the marketing campaigns for this film are giving you the spoiler of what is actually going on with this girl, and I don't want to give that part away. All that I will say is that much more on the dramatic side. Dare I say, this is not a horror movie at all. But since the horror trades are covering it, like Bloody Disgusting and whatnot, I decided to just involve it in this review because this was part of the IHSFF features section. And so the features section can typically be horror or sci-fi or some odd in-betweenness of here. But this is much more dramatic film, romance. This is about Jacky trying to find meaning within his community and within himself after all of his family is gone, but yet also while trying to balance that with a romance with this girl and the mystery about her. And then also he's got his best friend is like, a local cop or something like that. And so there was also some sheep getting killed in the vicinity. And so you're trying to figure out the mystery of that. I'm just going to leave it there. The performance from our lead kid, let's double check on his name right here, which is why I've got the trusty program guide. Also, I should specify this was directed by Lucas de Langlais. I know it's a French name probably, right? So I don't want to, I could say de Langle, but I know that's like the most, gringo American sort of pronunciation. But Lucas directed this film very well, but it's very much just slow and just very much, it's not a brooding film by any means. It's just a very thoughtful film as Jacky tries to come into his own and see if he actually does have this healing capacity. The main actor is Thomas Parigi. I'm giving it my best attempt at a French pronunciation. And he's very good in this film. And props to him, props to performance and stuff. And I guess the reason I have this lumped into the not so much recommend or not so fond of was because of the fact that despite some of the themes it explores, I don't feel that this is a horror movie. And so I'm slightly befuddled at the programming, and that's no slight on Monty or anything like that. It was an interesting film, but for personal taste of my own, it's not a film that I was too crazy about, although not necessarily bad, okay? So now we go into the fourth and the final of this first installment of my solo reviews from IHSFF 2023, and we are talking about the film that I really did not like very much. But once again, that's not to say that it didn't have redeeming qualities. This was another of the horror features, and so the way IHSFF breaks it up is you have your 4 horror features, you have your 4 sci-fi features, and then you have your 4 showcase. Like I said, that can be any of the few. So this was a film called Bad Connection, and it was directed by Jake Helgren, and Jake Helgren has done a lot of I guess you would say direct-to-video, low-budget horror sort of stuff. Direct-to-VOD now, I guess, is like the better way you would describe it. But I will say that I did like our lead character in this, Dana Davis. And so she is a waitress, and she has this boyfriend who is going back to school, and so she's more or less doing a lot of the financial supporting in the household. And they're talking about getting married, they're talking about having a kid, and she finds out that she's pregnant like right at the very beginning of the movie, so that plays a part in the storytelling. But an asshole customer at the beginning of the film is like mad that she's not filling up his coffee, and he's apparently a regular, and yet if you're going to be a regular at some place as somebody who's former service industry and be a total dickhead like that and have this entitled attitude, man, you're brain dead. Like, what is wrong with you? And so he decides to knock her phone into like a bunch of water, and so she's got it in rice, she's doing her damnedest, but doesn't look like it's salvageable, unfortunately, and so she's phoneless, and they're not full-on impoverished, but they're struggling, her and her boyfriend. And so he decides to be the sweet guy. And he's kind of a derp, but, he's played pretty well, and you can tell that they do have, like, a sweet sort of chemistry about them and stuff. But he decides to go and get her phone from a character who we meet at the very beginning of the film. And so this hood kid sells him the phone, and he's going to have it like jailbroken, or whatever the hell you do with phones that that've been stolen and are being repurposed or resold or whatever. And this is about the time where I tell you Bad Connection, which is what we're talking about here, is a slasher film, and it is at its most inventive with its premise. Okay. Because the phone that is actually stolen at the very beginning of this movie and then sold to boyfriend and given to Dana's character, it was from somebody who kidnaps, tortures, and murders women. So there you go. And the killer wants to get his phone back. So that's where you're like, on paper, this has a great setup. It truly does. And it has some interesting and amusing characters. I like Dana's character, and I also especially like the standouts in the film for me were kind of like her best friend at the establishment. It's actually her boss at the restaurant, and so it's I believe she's a Latina lady, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, I mean, they're living in like the LA area, but which is where this takes place. But in any event, it's her and her boyfriend, the best friend, and these Hispanic characters are so funny. They command the screen in everything that they do when they're on there. They're minor characters, obviously, but yeah. So Dana's character's best friend, the owner operator, and homie of hers at the restaurant, and that girl's boyfriend. They're fun. They are some of the I don't know. They lit up the screen when they were there, and they brought some very well needed humor. But gotta say, the killer is like about as dingbat dumb as you will find. The kills aren't too bad. There's a couple that are solidly done. I like the opening, what goes down with the opening kills, because a lot of these slashers have to have an opening kill that kind of sets the benchmark. But there are just times where she goes in this like elevator type thing in one of those loft sort of areas, and the guy's just he can't reach her, and yet he's still like. This is one that, great setup and, solid promise, especially with the premise, but it just loses its way. It does find it for a brief moment in the very middle, though, because Dana's character is just running around, and she ends up getting kidnapped halfway through by these two other characters, and it's one sleazy long-haired dude that I've seen on The Walking Dead and a few other things. He always plays like these total just gross sleazeball sort of guys, and it's him and his girlfriend that kidnap her at one particular point, and it's a weird little side subplot for a while that was where I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. Just like that's around the same time in the film where we have the stuff with Dana's character's friend and the boss, the Hispanic couple that they're friends with. And so that's where the movie started to get back to being interesting for me. And then from there, it just diverts back into boredom. I will say you do have Tiffany Shepis in a small role in this, but it felt like unnecessarily tacked on. Like her little subplot of having a sister who was a presumed victim of this killer, it just felt tacked on and unnecessary. And I'm trying to remember if the dude who is like the main detective who's on this case trying to figure out who this slasher guy is, this hunter dude, because he's going around in like this camo like hunter sort of gear, doing all these killings, and he's masked too, by the way. But I want to say it's the youngest Huxtable's best friend. Is it Olivia? I don't know. It looked like him all grown up, dude. Who knows? Might have been. I didn't check the IMDb before doing this review. But as a whole, like, Bad Connection is not one. It's not very good. It's not. I've seen worse. When I was walking out of this with Catherine, my partner, I was just like, I've seen worse. So there were some high points. The interlude with the tweakers that I mentioned, and then also her Hispanic homie couple. But beyond that, the rest of this film is just very by the numbers, boring, and the ending sucks. The ending sucks, and it's very much what you see with so many of these low budget, just kind of lame horror movies, where you're like, oh, could the person still be alive, even though it's very. I don't know. Once again, not trying to spoil anything, but that's going to do it, everyone, for the first half of my coverage, my solo coverage here. of the International Horror and Sci-Fi Film Festival in partnership with Phoenix Film Festival from 2023. I extend the grande gracias of Jaime and Fuego. You can find moi on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. So if you're kind enough to jump over and see whenever I have time to do any sort of solo stuff on my own, but I try to stay up on, the other socials, when I can. But obviously, like, share, subscribe this video, and go over and, make sure to just be ready for the next Phoenix Film Festival, next International Horror and Sci-Fi Film Festival. They always put together an incredible, just variety of programming. Even you can't win them all, but I mean, all 4 of these films that I just described, how different did they not sound from one another? So, props to Monty once again, props to Patrick, Jason Carney, everybody involved with just getting us as the horror show to cover this event. So I've been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and until next time, Freight fans, remember, stay scared.